Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We've got something really special lined up. We're going on a tour of an absolute giant of a cosmic library. Now look, I know when a lot of us hear ancient Indian literature, we immediately think dense, intimidating, maybe totally inaccessible, right? But we're flipping the script today. Think of this immense collection not as a bunch of dusty old books, but as a completely accessible, highly structured blueprint of universal knowledge.
And that brings us to the absolute core of our explainer. For millennia, these ancient traditions have claimed that these texts literally manifested from a divine source. We're not talking about human poetry here, we're talking about direct revelations. So the big question we're tackling today is, what exactly did God say? Like, if the creator of the universe literally left us an operating manual, a divine voice speaking directly to humanity, what were the instructions? What on earth was it trying to tell us about the universe and about ourselves? Okay, let's dive right into this. To make sure we're grounded in the actual facts, the exact source text we're unpacking today is called the Ved Parijat. It's essentially the ultimate foundational map of all Vedic literature. So, we're not just throwing ideas at the wall here, we're pulling our insights directly from this curated map to understand exactly how this incredible cosmic library is structured. Which brings us to our first stop, Section 1, Voice of the Divine.
You've probably heard the word Veda before, right? Well, it actually comes from the Sanskrit root vid, which means knowledge, thought, existence, and ultimate benefit. So when God said these words, or rather transmitted this specific divine frequency, it totally wasn't just a random list of arbitrary rules or dictator giving orders. The Vedas are literally the ultimate operating instructions for the universe. The ancient sages, the rishis, they didn't just sit down and write these texts, they realized them. They tuned their minds into that divine voice and basically recorded the pure existential knowledge that has literally always been there. All right, so to make this massive library super easy to navigate, here's our itinerary. First up, Voice of the Divine. Then, the Four Great Pillars. After that, From Rituals to Science. Then we'll hit the core philosophy and finish up with some timeless tales. Moving right along, Section 2, the Four Great Pillars.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how clearly it demystifies the four distinct wings of this cosmic library. Seriously, keep this map in your head and you'll never get lost. First, we've got the Rigveda. That's the oldest wing, totally packed with ancient hymns and praises. Then comes the Yajurveda, which shifts to prose and the exact, precise application of rituals. Next is the Samaveda, which is where the divine voice literally becomes musical, focusing on singing and chanting. And finally, the Atharvaveda. This is the highly practical wing, dealing with everyday human life and actual science. In each of these four pillars, God said something totally distinct.
And right inside that first pillar, the Rigveda, we hit this unbelievably profound concept. Eko hom bahushyam. It translates to, I am one, let me become many. When we ask what God said at the very spark of creation, the text points exactly to this single thought. The divine voice basically envisioned the entire universe with all of its crazy, dazzling complexity bursting forth from one unified supreme source. It is just a breathtaking statement of cosmic unity. Let's transition into Section 3, From Rituals to Science. So let's look closer at the Yajurveda. It actually split into two traditions over time, Shukla, which means pure, and Krishna, which means mixed. And our source text shares this brilliant, honestly kind of hilarious ancient anecdote about how this happened. So the great sage Yajnavalkya gets into this massive, fierce argument with his guru. He gets so angry that he literally vomits up the mantras he was taught. I know, wild, right? Then his fellow students actually turn themselves into partridges, tittery birds, just to consume those regurgitated mantras. Because those mantras were now mixed with commentary and, slightly soiled by the whole vomiting incident, they became known as the Krishna, or mixed Yajurveda. After that, Yajnavalkya actually prayed straight to the sun god to get fresh, unmixed mantras, and those became the Shukla, or pure Yajurveda. It just perfectly shows that even when we're dealing with divine transmission, human drama is absolutely for sure going to play a role. But honestly, what's perhaps most surprising is that the divine voice wasn't strictly philosophical. It was highly, highly scientific. In the Atharvaveda, God basically said, hey, here is exactly how you heal the human body. We literally find the very roots of Ayurveda right here. It's got detailed treatments for things like fever and tuberculosis. It even outlines early surgical techniques, called shalyachitsa, including the use of catheters for urinary retention and specific methods for washing wounds. To put that into perspective, it bridges ancient wisdom and modern medical science in a way that is just staggering. Now let's look at how this knowledge actually builds structurally over time. Each of those 4 Vedas we just talked about is actually layered, kind of like a massive pyramid. Down at the base, you have the Samhitas. Those are the core original mantras. Build on top of that, and you get the Brahmanas, which explain exactly how to apply those mantras in actual rituals. Moving up, as people started retiring to the forest to really think deeply, we get the Aranyakas, the forest meditations. And finally, at the very peak of the pyramid, we reach the Upanishads. This is the pure, incredibly deep philosophical essence of the texts. Which perfectly leads us to section 4, core philosophy. As we step into the Upanishads, the divine voice shifts its focus entirely inward, looking directly at the spiritual truth of the human soul. In the Katha Upanishad, the divine voice presents humanity with a pretty fundamental choice between 2 paths, Shreyas and Priyas. Now, Priyas is the path of immediate, short-term material pleasure. Whatever feels good right in this exact moment. But Shreyas, that is the path of ultimate good, discipline, and absolute spiritual liberation. And this brilliantly illustrates a conflict every single one of us faces every day, doesn't it? The text basically tells us that a truly wise person meticulously looks at both options and intentionally chooses Shreyas over the fleeting, temporary illusions of Priyas. And the Chandogya Upanishad gives us this absolutely beautiful metaphor to help wrap our heads around the nature of reality. It points out that just by knowing the truth of a single lump of clay, you instantly understand the truth of every single clay pot, plate, or figure that has ever been made. Knowing the singular root truth of the universe reveals absolutely everything. All those different names and forms, calling it a pot or a plate, those are just temporary illusions created by language and shape. The only absolute, unchanging truth is the clay itself. God basically said, you have to look past the changing forms and see the eternal substance underneath. Let's head into our final section. Section 5, Timeless Tales. To really ground these super lofty philosophical concepts, the texts provide these deeply human, incredibly relatable stories known as Akhyanas. These stories actually show us what happens when real human beings interact with that divine voice. One of the absolute most powerful ones comes from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The great sage Yajurveda, yep, the exact same guy from our earlier bird story, is getting ready to leave for the forest to meditate. So he offers to divide all his massive wealth between his wives. But his scholar wife Maitreyi stops him and asks this incredibly piercing question. If the whole earth, filled with wealth, were mine, would I become immortal through it? Yajurveda answers, no. To which Maitreyi replies with this legendary quote, "What will I do with wealth if it doesn't give me immortality?" She literally completely rejects all worldly comfort in exchange for the ultimate knowledge of the soul. No hesitation. Then we have this super gripping narrative from the Katha Upanishad. There's this young, totally unshakable boy named Nachiketa. He is basically given away to death by his angry father. So Nachiketa literally travels to the underworld. But get this, Yama, the god of death, isn't even home. So Nachiketa just sits at the door, straight up refusing to eat or drink for 3 full days until death returns. Just imagine the sheer determination of this kid. So when Yama finally gets back, he is absolutely horrified that a guest was left waiting and starving at his door. To make amends, he offers the boy 3 boons. Nachiketa asks for peace for his angry father, then knowledge of the sacred fire. But for his 3rd wish, he demands the ultimate secret, what actually happens to the soul after death. Yama tries desperately to bribe him to drop it. He offers unimaginable wealth, chariots, and incredibly long life just to avoid answering. But Nachiketa completely refuses the prayas, the material wealth. He literally forces death himself to become a teacher, proving that true divine knowledge is only ever revealed to those who reject the illusion of temporary worldly pleasures. Finally, let's look at a really quick story from the Kanna Upanishad. The gods had just won this massive, epic victory over the demons. But, as happens, they grew deeply arrogant. They started thinking their own personal strength won the battle, and they completely forgot the divine source of their power. So, to humble them, the Supreme Brahman appears as this mysterious entity, a yaksha, and it proves to them that without the divine will, the god of fire couldn't even burn a single tiny blade of grass, and the god of wind couldn't even make it move. Finally, the goddess Uma-Himavati appears to deliver the ultimate lesson. She looks at the gods and says, "You were merely instruments. Your power is borrowed from the Supreme.
So the crucial point here is this: true strength doesn't come from your ego. It comes from recognizing the divine presence in absolutely all of your actions. The very second we trap ourselves in arrogance and start thinking, I did this all by myself, we literally cut ourselves off from the very source of our power.
So we've walked through the reading rooms of this vast cosmic library. We've seen that when God spoke, the divine voice provided an incredible blueprint for the creation of the universe, super practical scientific instructions for medicine and healing, and the ultimate philosophical map for the human soul to find true immortality. It is just an astoundingly complete operating manual for existence. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. The divine voice spoke of the universe, medicine, and the soul. Which part of that ancient structured blueprint are you seeking for your own life right now? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.